Depending on which game you're playing, war either has changed or never changes. Whichever view you subscribe to, there's always new war games coming out, and we want to talk about this year's. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the top 10 new war games of 2021. Starting off at number 10, it's Sprocket. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that this game is different. This list spans some different genres, and it's cool to see something novel like this. It's a tank designing game. It's currently in early access, and it is a little rough around the edges. There's no tutorial to tell you what does what, but this is a beautiful game, weirdly enough, and it's really, really fun. Basically, you sit down and meticulously design a tank, down to angles, gun placement. You can even create some very silly stuff. And then you put the tank through combat scenarios, which are designed really well. It is a fun game. It's currently a single player game, but it seems purely like the best multiplayer idea of all time. And given its early access and it's being pretty well received, there's a pretty big player base. Fans talk about multiplayer all the time. Someday in the future, that might be where the game goes. I have my hopes, but I think you should try it out. It's $20 and it's worth every cent. You will waste so much time with this thing. And number 9 is Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts 2. Now, as you know, the Sniper series is kind of one of the best sniping games out there, and they've gone with various models for how you get into your engagements and whatnot. Ghost Warrior Contracts introduced mission-based gameplay instead of open world, and the sequel doesn't quit. It brings basically everything, maybe not a revolutionary, but an evolutionary iteration, and I enjoy this game probably more than I enjoy the first. I think that the Ghost Warrior Contract series was the right way to go after Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. I actually think that the mission structure works way better for the type of game it is. In some ways, it's kind of like how Hitman organizes itself, but it's a completely different game. Again, it's kind of just more of the first game with some minor improvements that are certainly worthwhile, and in my opinion, that justifies a purchase. These are good games. And number 8 is Medic Pacific War, which is a really novel looking game. Now, we don't have an exact release date for this one, so it's up in the air exactly when we see it, but this is just a totally different approach at a war game. Basically, it's a third-person soldier saving game. You go out onto the battlefield, you have to make tough decisions about who to save, how to save them, if you can save them, and it has you bandaging wounds, shoving gauze into frankly gory holes in people's bodies, trying to cut off circulation, carrying people around. Honestly, it's kind of one of the more realistic depictions of this. If the graphics aren't necessarily perfect, the type of violence and gore that is depicted here is honestly just a little bit more real feeling, if not necessarily looking. I think the concept of this game is so novel and interesting that it could potentially be one of the more interesting games to play. It's not that it looks particularly strange or anything, but it's almost strange that it exists or strange that it hasn't existed yet. I think this looks like a great game. I can't wait to play it. And number 7 is War on the Sea. Now, I'm sure that some people will see this and think, that's like the Assassin's Creed pirate stuff, except obviously set in a more recent time. That is not the case. This is a slower paced strategic game with a lot of depth. And although I'm not going to say that the interface is perfect, the result, the way that this game plays out always feels huge, cinematic and cool, just something that feels intense. It strikes a good balance between a tactics game and a full-on RTS. It's neither of those things. It incorporates elements of each, and it's a game that's getting continuously updated with some pretty responsive devs. And number 6 is Iron Conflict. This is a full-blown, real-time strategy game. Has some MOBA elements, but all in all, feels like competitive RTS. And I think probably the thing I would say is the best element of this game is the pacing. You'll notice a lot of Total War elements, but it never, feels like a copy of it. Basically, it's 10v10 matches where you control 3 units. That sounds pretty limited, but they really really lean into a lot of the RTS stuff. Like I said, I would say it's more of like straightforward RTS than you'd expect. This one's still in early access, so it's not quite there in terms of where it's going to be when they release, but there's tons of potential in this, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. And number 5 is Enlisted, a squad-based MMO FPS, which drops you into various World War II scenarios. Essentially, you control a squad of between 4 and 9 soldiers. You're either infantry, you could be piloting an aircraft, might be in ground vehicles, large variety of weapons. You get to play in various factions, the US Army, the Red Army, and even the Wehrmacht. There's 4 campaigns: Normandy, Berlin, Moscow, and Tunisia, and they're all broken up into several missions, the shortest of which being 3, the longest of which being 7. Now, this game can prove a little divisive. Some people absolutely just stand by it, while others really do not like it, but I think it's at least a solid concept that plays out not necessarily perfect, but interesting. And for me, when the right mood strikes, this is a fun game. And number 4 is Hell Let Loose, which I don't want to get particularly competitive. Out of Enlisted and Hell Let Loose, this is the one that executes that concept better. There are certainly people who would probably argue against that point, but it takes a slightly different approach. It does a 50 versus 50 match, and the way that it has everything set up, I feel like kinda is better. There's 2 modes, Warfare and Offensive. Warfare is kind of like old school Star Wars Battlefront, in that the point is to gain control of all of the sectors. In the other mode, Offensive, one team starts in control of all sectors, and the other team has to try to take it. And it's not one-to-one with Star Wars Battlefront back in the day. It just reminds me of that in some respects, and I really enjoy that setup. But on top of all that, I do mean literally on top of it, there's an RTS-inspired resource strategic metagame on top of it, and it adds a completely different layer to the whole thing. I would say it's a pretty different game than Enlisted in a lot of ways, but it's kind of the same cell, if that makes sense, and I'd rather be playing Hell Let Loose. And number 3 is Halo Infinite. Now, this is a game that I don't think anybody needs to be told is on its way. Halo is one of the biggest franchises in gaming, period. And it was supposed to come out last year. They delayed it because there was a lot of kind of infamous unfair criticism of how the game looked. It didn't look as good as it could, but it was also clearly meant to evoke remembering the original Halo. They've apparently done a lot of work on the game. What I'm particularly interested in personally is just how well the whole campaign works out. We know a lot about the multiplayer in this one. It's free to play. Apparently it's mainly cosmetics and stuff that's going to be in play with that type of mechanic, so that's fun. Also, I like that you're going to be able to play Halo multiplayer with anybody else who wants to play it, and it's also going to be on Xbox Game Pass day 1. So, I mean, what else is there to say? It's the next big Halo. And number 2 is Call of Duty Vanguard, which is billing itself as the best World War II game. That's a pretty big brag, especially since it's not out yet. Basically, it's about the beginning of the Special Forces to deal with end of and post World War II threats. It's interesting because it looks like they're really trying to tell a wide-ranging story with different perspectives in the single-player campaign, and you're gonna see like people who are inspired by some real-life people, like Lieutenant Paulina Petrova, who is based on the Soviet sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, more popularly known as Lady Death. I mean, if I'm honest, it kind of sounds like one of the better versions of what it could be. Obviously, we've seen a million Call of Duty games at this point, so it's really the execution. In terms of the idea, I think I'm on board. And who doesn't want to play another zombies campaign, honestly? I always do. And finally, at number 1, it's Battlefield 2042. And that was a really limited beta of Battlefield 2042 to gauge reaction and do some bug testing, which apparently a lot of these bugs were a big problem for some players, and DICE has already said that they've fixed them, but there's kind of a split opinion on Battlefield 2042. Obviously, nobody's been able to play through the entirety of what will be offered, and I'll say I didn't personally get to be able to play that beta, so I am just commenting on what I've heard from other folks. I know one person who absolutely loved it. I know one person who hated it. And for me, like, obviously it looks like there's plenty of potential. It's a Battlefield game, and there's always like a period of time where the Battlefield fandom is kind of skeptical of the current game, even when it's out. So ultimately, like, we're kind of just waiting to gauge it. I hope that it's better than I have heard it described to me, and in truth, it looks like it could be, but we'll see. Obviously, I am always cautiously optimistic for the franchise. It's ultimately been one that has delivered quality despite obvious missteps, so I've got hopes. Couple of bonuses as well. First one we're talking about is Humankind, a turn-based strategy game from Sega and Amplitude Studios. It's kind of a 4X Civilization type game. It does some things differently, but that's what it's really competing against. I really enjoy it. It brings a lot to the table. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.